Hello.
Hi, John.
Hi,
Hi.
hi.
Hi, how are you guys?
Good.
I'm good. How about you?
How are you?
Yeah, I'm really well, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, well,
Great.
Good,
yeah,
good,
thank you for the
good.
time. So, yeah, I'm okay from Glasp.
And I'm
And
Kazuki. Nice to meet you.
Hello.
So
mm,
this is like a Glasp talk session, and we want to start this kind of like TED Talk, and Google
Hmm.
also has a Google Talk, and we want to
Yeah.
have Grasp Talk so that we interview like a great minds, like from
Oh,
writers, like content creators and YouTuber, or I don't know, like many influencers, and so then understand what they care about and what what's the philosophy, behind
yeah.
what they do and what's the
Yeah.
curiosity and so on. So yeah, and this is the first interview for us. So yeah,
Oh,
really, yeah,
great.
thank you so much for
Oh, thank you very
taking
much.
time.
I'm very
uh,
flattered. Very flattered.
thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's get started. And yep, great.
Great.
So
Okay.
okay. Welcome, Johnny. So to Graph Talk, and today we'd like to ask you some questions about your philosophy, writing, and so on, and your history
Great.
too. So, and first of all, can you introduce yourself for we know who you are, but can you introduce yourself for the people who don't know you yet?
Hi. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I'm Jonny Thomson. I am the author of one book already out called Mini Philosophy, a little book of big ideas, and my second book's coming out in 2 weeks' time. It's called
Mhm.
Mini
Oh
Big
wow,
Ideas. But I'm also a staff writer at Big Think, which is an American outlet which focuses on smart ideas and kind of academic pieces and explainers, videos and written content as well. So I cover mainly philosophy and psychology, but I kind of branch out wherever I'm kind of needed. And then separately to that, I run the Instagram account called Mini Philosophy, which explains philosophy. But yeah, essentially, I'm a writer. I'm a writer for Big Think and for Hachette, which is my publisher. Yeah.
cool. Yeah, I've been following your Instagram and account. That's really, yeah, super,
Good.
super, yeah, great and
Thank you.
useful. And thank you. Yeah.
Thank
So,
you.
and yeah, that's interesting. Philosophy is really interesting topic.
Hmm.
And what, so first of all, I think people have different definition of philosophy. And in your case, in your perspective, what is philosophy? And sorry, this is a big question maybe, but and if you have
No, not
any
at all.
ideas.
Yeah, no, it comes up quite a lot, that question, actually. So, yeah, if you're looking at, well, the basic roots of the word are it means kind of the love of wisdom. But I think that's just
Mhm.
such a broad term that I'm not kind of sure kind of like it kind of gets to the grips with it. I mean, different people have different answers. Some people will say philosophy is just an academic discipline that you have to go to university or you have to be a writer to engage with. Some people will say it's just kind of maybe just asking big questions about the world, and I kind of come somewhere in between. I think that I believe that anyone who has academic curiosity, I would say, is a philosopher of sorts. So if you go way back in time a little bit, you'll see that philosophy actually isn't limited to necessarily, people doing logic and studying these big philosophical names, doing epistemology and things like that, and ethics. It's just the study of everything. So natural philosophy was the study of the sciences. So a philosopher, let's pick one out, for example, Descartes. Descartes would have done everything. He did do everything. He did maths, he did science, he did philosophy, he did literature, he did poetry. And he was just a curious man. I think if you're using Descartes or Plato as being like these representatives of philosophy, then I think what you're seeing is it's curiosity and wanting to just to learn and to find out and yeah, to study things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I know the philosophy comes from philosophia, right? I think love of wisdom, and
Yeah,
yeah, I love the word,
yeah,
and yeah, and it's interesting. People call PhD when they finish
yeah.
doctors process, and it's a
That's
philosophy
right.
of doctor, right? And that's
Yeah, I've got
the
some friends who have
terminology.
PhDs in sciences like physics and chemistry and stuff, and I always wind them up a little bit. They're doing philosophy, but of course, in their mind, they're doing stuff which is serious and proper and intense. Whereas, yeah, you're right. Doctors of Philosophy is a good point. So that kind of that explains it really, doesn't it? Okay.
Yeah, thanks. And so you are writing about philosophy at big thing crowd, right? And then what kind of philosophy or area do you cover a big thing? I think it's it can be variety of topics, right? Can you elaborate on that?
It's a really good question. So it kind of varies a little bit. So I mean, it kind of started out where it as kind of just explaining major philosophical schools. So I think actually the first article I ever wrote for them was talking about Democritus and the atom. And then since then, I've explained kind of like American pragmatism. I've explained skepticism, Stoicism, and I've explained, Nietzsche and Descartes and things. So it's a basic explainer. So we're kind of where that's kind of my starting point. But since then, I kind of like talk about the philosophy of anything, because I everything has a philosophy. I think we could debate anything really. So anything stuff which is in the news, it often gets kind of like the treatment. And yeah, so the philosophy of, I think we did cringe humor, like the cringe jokes and stuff about why things like The Office, the television program The Office, why is it funny and things. Kind of branched into psychology a little bit. Ethics, we did one about kind of like who, for example, programs the ethics into driverless cars. That's an interesting question. So we look at the kind of the borderlands between philosophy and technology is really important. So we did one about CRISPR technology as well, about kind of about genetics and about kind of manipulating your DNA and see what the ethical connotations are for that. So yeah, it starts out as explainers, and now I essentially do philosophy of anything and everything. I mean, what the process is, normally I have an idea, and I'll pitch the idea to my editor, and he'll say, mostly that's a good idea, Jonny. And occasionally he'll say, Jonny, that's a stupid idea. Let's not do that. But he's great. I've got two editors actually, Alex and Stephen. They're both really nice people, and they both are very honest, and they're very kind of straight with me.
That's good.
I see.
Here,
you tapped into the like the workflow with editors, and do you pitch, and you said you pitch some ideas, but do you usually you decide what to write on, and then editors say, oh, this is a good idea or not, and or editors told you, oh, can you write about this, or how does it work?
Yeah, it's a combination actually sometimes. So sometimes my editors will say, do this article, this is a good idea, write this article about this topic. Or maybe someone else in the wider company has had a good philosophical idea, and they said, like, let's get Jonny to write that. But other times it's I pitch ideas to them. So I've actually got this joke with some of my friends that if we're having an interesting conversation over dinner or in the bar or in the pub, I'll get my phone out and I'll say, is this a good idea for an article? And then I'll kind of got a list. So actually, yeah, my editor only recently said, Jonny, can you stop sending me lists of 20 pictures at a time? It's just too overwhelming. Can you stagger it a little bit? So yeah, so I mean, they kind of occasionally come to me, but they kind of come from conversations I have with friends. I'm very lucky and to have lots of friends who are quite intelligent and interesting people. So those kind of conversations do spark ideas, but it's kind of half and half. So occasionally my editor will say, yeah, do this. And occasionally I'll say, right, this might make for a good idea, which by all accounts, I think is most editor-writer relationships I understand.
I see. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And sorry, I'm so curious about your idea synthesizing process, and also how do you said your friends sometimes spark ideas, but how do you usually come up with ideas to write about? So do you read some let's say you read some books or articles or listen to podcasts, and so that some ideas comes to you, or how and what mainly brought you some ideas?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I subscribe to a few magazines and newspapers. So over here in the UK, we've got two called the London Review of Books, which I subscribe to, and I read that. Not cover to cover, but it gives me lots of inspiration for ideas. And then there's something called Philosophy Now, which is it's somewhere in between an academic paper and a very layman's term philosophy. So I would say that if you don't know anything about philosophy, you might find it a touch hard. But then, of course, if you're a professional philosopher, you'd find it really hard as well. But it's called philosophy now, and it's brilliant for people like me. It's kind of like pitch with ideas. So I go through that often, and that'll kind of spark an idea. But also social media. Social media is really interesting, both in terms of what hashtags are popular at the moment, in terms of what other people are talking about. Again, I follow some really interesting accounts, and they've got some ideas, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. But you know, sometimes those come from a book I'm reading. So for example, I was really into Taoism about 2 months ago. I was reading a book about Taoism, and I was pitching about 5 articles a week about Taoism, and 1 or 2 of them are a big thing, and they've done pretty well actually. But yeah, because I also write this newsletter for the Well. So the Well is part of Big Think. I write a newsletter for them, and you can kind of tell a little bit if you know me very well, which obviously might think that my wife and my friends do. If you're reading the newsletters, you can see that I've clearly read something last week, and it kind of feeds into my unconscious, which then feeds into my writing. But then I think that's true for every writer. I think all of our writing is essentially a bubbling up of what we've digested through what we've read at some point in our lives, be it last week or last year or when you were a young child. I think that's how writing works, personally.
I see.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks. And but I think, you know, what you found interesting is I think philosophy, some ideas are really complicated and hard to understand and digest, and sometimes you need to convey or make it simplify the ideas to people. And I think, you know, your Instagram account is doing pretty good job, and you know, it's very easy and visually understandable. And but how do you like convey some ideas, or how to say, make the ideas, you know, easy to understand or digest? And do you have some
Thank you.
strategies around this?
Thank you. It's really kind. It's really kind of you to say that. Well, 2 things I'll say actually. The first thing is I'll say that I was a teacher for 12 years. So I taught well, from year 12 up. So 12-year-olds up until kind of 16-year-olds, 17-year-old, 18-year-olds. So you kind of like get used to kind of simplifying language for students, but also B, maybe different abilities of students as well. And the second thing is that I always think that everyone listening to this, reading this, or watching this, has philosophical ideas. And it might be at a certain time in the evening, or when you're talking to your friend and you're saying, you know, do you think this is right or wrong? Have you ever had this thought? Or, you know, what are your views about God? Or, you know, what does truth mean? Whatever. And I think we have those conversations, but I think the difference with philosophy and those kind of conversations is that philosophy has a certain language around it and certain structure about it. So what I try to do with the Instagram account, what I try to do with Big Think is obviously strip away that kind of that language and kind of present the questions, which I think everyone has, the thoughts everyone has, in a slightly more kind of accessible way. But yeah, it's hard sometimes. So philosophers have a great tendency to use Latin expressions or ancient Greek. And when I'm writing an article or doing a post about that, it's just you use the expression and then you just explain it in English and then you just move on. But there are certain just expressions which kind of just work their way into philosophical lexicon, really. And I try to not use them as much as possible. And it's really difficult so I found it when I was teaching philosophy, and also now when I'm trying to kind of explain it, is actually if you go to the primary texts, if you go to what the philosophers were saying, it's really quite dense often, actually. I can't think of any philosophy possibly or philosopher who makes it easy. I think weirdly enough, sometimes translations are better. So when I was teaching it, like someone like Descartes' Meditations translates easier. And then if you're reading someone like John Stuart Mill, who writes in English, it actually can be quite hard because you're separated by the centuries of English. And then I mean, you've got someone like Nietzsche, who I when I first read him, I found him really easy, but then my students today actually find him quite hard. It's because what I find with a lot of philosophers is that you have to get your ear in. You have to spend an hour, 2 hours reading them and getting used to them and what they're saying, what they mean, and then after that it becomes easier. And I think we're living in an age now where the idea of investing an hour or 2 hours, which is a slog and it's a struggle to get your ear in, is not really that popular. So yeah, I try to introduce the ideas first, and then I suggest go away and read it because it helps you get your ear in a little bit. But yeah, does that answer your question? I think it did.
Oh yeah. Thank you. Yeah,
Good.
totally. Yeah, great. And you talked into, you were a teacher, right? And then I think you have really interesting background. And then, I'm sorry, it's, I'm curious about your history and background and what made you to become teacher and then writer later.
Yeah. There's a good answer and there's an honest answer to this. The good answer would be that I've always wanted to be a teacher to inspire thousands of students. But I mean, the honest answer is that when I first started out, I liked two things. I liked philosophy and I liked being able to afford food. And so teaching was the only way I could do that, really, unless you become a professional philosopher, which at the time I didn't choose to do. Or you do what I'm doing now, which is writing. But at the time when I first started out teaching, that wasn't really an avenue or even a possibility. I mean, as it happened, I did end up loving teaching. I'm not, I didn't resent it the whole time. I did take to it, and I did love it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have stayed there for 12 years. It's a really great experience teaching, and you do get to see children transform into adults, and you get to change a lot of lives, particularly in philosophy. Actually, I think philosophy is a really unique subject in that you have some very deep and important conversations with students, and because you're often studying a text or an idea, it kind of distances yourself from the person in the kind of like, which is it invites them to be open and honest about what they believe and what they think. And so yeah, I was very privileged to have some really quite valuable conversations with students, actually, because we were talking about these ideas, particularly existentialism, actually, like the French existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir and Frantz Fanon. Some really honest and important conversations. And when I left the school last year, I got some really quite heartwarming and heartbreaking messages from the students. So yeah, it was good. I loved it, but new horizons beckon.
I see. Yeah, and I think knowing about philosophy, or I mean, like following curiosity and how I don't know, like teaching philosophy is really hard subject, but like knowing about it and in at a younger age is great experience for their life. I think that opens their eyes, and I believe, and
yeah.
at the same time, I'm curious, what made you to interest in philosophy? I mean, looking back your history, life, and what point, in your life, realize, oh, I want to go for this direction.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So both of my parents are psychologists, they're doctors of psychology.
Wow.
And so my dad is a cognitive psychologist, and speaking in child development particularly, and my mum is a counselor, therapist, a psychotherapist, actually. She's a card-carrying member of the Freudian school of counseling. So yeah, growing up, we had these kind of open, honest conversations with them, and there was a lot of academic curiosity around the table. I was talking about earlier about philosophy being this academic curiosity. There was a lot of that. A lot of being unashamed to be to learn and to ask questions. And to be honest, if my parents weren't psychologists, I possibly might have done psychology at university. But they were, and so that kind of like, you don't want to do what your parents do, at least directly. And so the other factor was that I had a really inspirational teacher. Yeah, he was just a really good teacher. He knew exactly how to teach students, but also me particularly. And I think my first forays into reading philosophy were pretty much just to impress him, actually. But once I started reading, yeah, like a bug set in, really. I actually started with Nietzsche. I was talking about Nietzsche earlier. I started with him. I found him really exciting. I found like he was deliberately trying to kind of provoke you as the reader, and he was quite evocative, and I liked that. And then I actually didn't go into deep philosophy for a long time. I looked at William James next, who's this American pragmatist philosopher. Again, very readable and very evocative, and he gives lots of examples. So I read his book called The Varieties of Religious Experience. It's big, but it's really readable, because actually it's a series of lectures. So he's written it in a way which is meant to be kind of digested easily. And then from there I went to university, and that's when they throw the dense texts at you. That's when you start reading your Plato's Republic, and you start reading your John Stuart Mills and your René Descartes and Hegel, if you're feeling particularly masochistic. But yeah.
Cool. Wow. So you said some books, you recommended, and do you have any other books you want to recommend, for people who want to start learning about philosophy? I mean, not, advanced one, but,
Yeah.
for the beginners.
Other than my own book, of course, I would
You can
suggest
include
that.
it.
Yeah, I would say the one for me, Nigel Warburton. He's actually not an Oxford philosopher. He wrote, I think it's a brief history or a short history of philosophy. Whenever I recommend to students, I say recommend. I recommend that. It's really good, really accessible. But yeah, as a primary source, I would still suggest someone like Nietzsche, because I think he does deliberately provoke, and he is quite exciting, or again, yeah, William James or Bertrand Russell. He's also quite readable. Particularly, he wrote a lot of essays as well. I think Bertrand Russell, if you're looking for a primary text of a philosopher, I should say Bertrand Russell, not on logic, because Russell, like a lot of British analytic philosophers, had kind of one leg on either side of maths department and the philosophy department. So if you read his stuff on logic, that's going to take some chewing. But I mean, he wrote lots of stuff about other philosophers. So you've got the History of Western Philosophy, which he wrote, which is really accessible. But other than that, I would say actually novels. Good night. If you find a good novel, they really do unpack some philosophy really well. Recently, I'm reading into a short story author called Ted Chiang. He wrote a book called Exhalation, was his most recent one, and it's called the Story of Your Life or Story of Others' Lives, was his first collection. They're that short science fiction-y stories, but every one is just like it's an extended thought experiment. They're brilliant. I really recommend reading those. And actually, science fiction more broadly, science fiction generally is usually a thought experiment from a seminar room expanded into many pages and many books, really. In fact, I think I've got the Asimov series behind me, which is a good example of that. But yeah.
Or reading your books, right? New books, I think. Coming.
Yeah.
In next week or next month?
In 2 weeks?
2 weeks?
Yeah, 2 weeks. Next one comes out in 2 weeks. It's a bit different, that one, actually. So it's not actually philosophy really per se. It's the history of ideas. So these ideas which change the course of human history, really, and which kind of which we kind of look back on and think, I can't imagine a time before that idea. So yeah, there's 150 examples of those, and yeah, it was really fun and exciting to read that and to research for that, actually. But, yeah.
Oh,
Don't know how much you want to talk about that.
Wait. Great. So let's get back to your writing process. And I remember. Do you? I know how to how you come up with this idea, but and then what kind of tools do you use? You use like a knowledge management system or any note-taking system do you use?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I used to use this must be a long time ago, about 9 years ago, use something called Google Reader, which used RSS feeds. Yeah. And then they discontinued that Google because obviously it wasn't making enough money. And so then I was basically searching for something which allows you to import your RSS feeds. And I found Feedly. Feedly, it's like a little green icon on the App Store. And that did it really well. So I made a mistake with Feedly of oversubscribing to things. And I got bombarded with too many things I didn't really want to read. I was putting them into categories and stuff, but it didn't really work. So I kind of let that kind of go by the side. And I tried Pocket as well. But with Pocket, I find that once I've like pocketed it and I bookmarked it into Pocket, I assume that future Johnny's going to read it, and then future Johnny never does read it because he finds some other article to read. So if I'm honest, I'm a multi-Chrome tab person. I don't know how I'm lucky enough to have quite a computer with quite a lot of RAM. So my Chrome has like something like 17 tabs open at any one period of time. And yeah, and I'll kind of dip into them. And of course, occasionally you accidentally press the X and the close on the top right corner, and you lose all of these things. And obviously you go to history, but when I used to work at the school, they had a policy where they didn't save your history, and so I'd lose all of my articles. And I was like, oh, wow. what a disaster. But then when I bookmark it, I have the same problem. I bookmark it and then it's out of my sight, and I never come back to it. To be honest, nowadays I'm just researching anyway for articles that I'm writing, I should say. So I'm reading them, I'm learning from them, and then I'm writing them, and then they're kind of just ditched from that. Occasionally, as I'm researching for an article, I'll come across something which is really good and really cool, and which I want to recommend to a friend, and I'll bookmark those. Or to be honest, I'll directly send them to my friend. The other thing I do actually, which is probably quite strange and probably abnormal actually, I imagine, is that I've got a WhatsApp group with only me in. So I'll just send photos of things, or I'll send an article or a little text memo, and I'll just send it to myself. And then I'll pick it up from that, because obviously WhatsApp syncs across my phone from the computer, and it's quite good. But then that's also because sorry.
Yeah,
Oh,
I know many
thanks.
people like email to themselves about the things they wanna remind later, and that's interesting. And sorry, Kay, you have a question.
Yeah, so do you read articles on mobile or desktop? For sure you read on desktop, but so what kind of articles do you read on mobiles?
I read on mobile occasionally, but I find desktop. It's just maybe it's the headspace I'm in when I'm at my desktop, at my computer like this, for example. I think I process it in a different way than I would if I'm on my phone reading it. I think the phone is just it's too distraction heavy. On a basic level, if you get a notification, you're checking that occasionally when it comes up. But on the desktop, it is a little bit more right. This is my job. I'm going to read this article and go through it and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I will sometimes send it to myself to read on the sofa or something like that. But to be honest, I don't do much article reading on my phone. I'll do social media on my phone, and I've got a Kindle, so I'll do my books on my Kindle. I read that on things, but yeah, it's mainly desktop actually. Also because I use a website called JSTOR quite a lot, JSTOR, which is essentially like this repository of academic articles. And they don't do very well on desktop or on mobile. Sorry, I mean you can get them on mobile, but because a lot of them are scanned in from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, you're constantly zooming up, and they're PDFs, which again doesn't do particularly well on phone. You have to open different apps and stuff like that, and it's confusing. So mainly desktop. That's where I do most of my article reading, or as I say, those newspapers and articles from magazines that I read. Yeah.
I see.
And what writing tool do you use? I mean, you said you tried something. You use tabs, but when you write down something, do you use Google Docs or
So I write my articles in Microsoft Word, but anything collaborative we use Google Docs at the company. I don't know why. I think it's easy to share, isn't it, that way? But in terms of like copying and pasting small bits and bobs, as I say, I'll tend to WhatsApp them to myself because it syncs easier, just to my that way. Or I'll just copy and paste it straight into the article I'm going to do. It's the more I'm talking about it, the messier it sounds. But it doesn't feel messy, possibly because I'm constantly control tabbing and alt tabbing and stuff like that, and it at the time it feels okay. But actually, tell you what, the problem is though, that if I'm in this kind of workflow stage where I'm writing, and I say I'm alt tabbing and shift tabbing and control tabbing away across. Sorry, I should say that's for Windows, isn't it? I think for Mac users, it might be different controls. But anyway, when you go away and you come back, it takes a while to get back into that kind of like mode, which tab is where. But I don't think I'm this chaotic, but I sound chaotic. Sorry.
No, it's not.
Then we have talked to some writers, then they as you mentioned, collaborate with editors so that they use Google Docs so that they can leave comments and interact and showing some source information on it. And I think people have different workflow and with editors and so on. So that makes sense.
So if a big thing, it's mainly maybe Google Docs, but for my actual books, I write it in Microsoft Word, and I'll send it as a Word document, and then my editor, she'll put comments in on Microsoft Word. You'll send that document back to me, and then I'll either resolve them or fix the problem. But so she uses Words. I mean, it's not a biggie. Google Docs and Microsoft Word are, there's a cigarette paper separating them. Really, they're very similar, aren't they?
I see. Cool. And this is just my curiosity, but how long does it take for you to write one article? Is that
Uh,
weeks
let's say,
or three
oh
three
no,
hours?
not weeks. No, so I mean, most articles take me about a day to write. So my process is usually that I spend the morning researching, getting my ideas, and getting kind of like a template for the structure of the article together. And then the afternoon will be actually writing it. If I'm honest, the actual writing process probably takes, half an hour to an hour. It's just the researching for that writing, and then it's the editing, and then it's the uploading to the system, which takes a long time to do, and the formatting, and of course the grammar and the spell checking and stuff. I think I can't remember who said it. I think there's a quotation where someone said, it's like Mark Twain or Oscar Wilde or something. I'm sorry that my letter's so long. I didn't have time to make it shorter. And I think his idea was that editing is the time sucker. It's the writing itself. Anyone can do. Like if I asked you to write an account of what you did today, it would be pretty easy to do. It's just making it interesting. But yeah, and so into that, of course, AI is an interesting a tool to use. I don't know if you want to go into talking about AI.
Let's do
yeah. So yeah, I mean, when it first came out, I think me and I think all the world were just experimenting with it, weren't we? And we're trying to do what we can. And I was doing stuff like in the style of a philosopher, write this, and at first it does come across as really kind of plausible. And I think most of the world were like, oh my god, it's going to take our jobs. This is the end of writing as a human thing. And I think, yeah, I mean, two things really happens. One is that it what's called, I think it's called hallucinating, sorry, in the language, where it just makes up stuff.
Yeah.
It wants to come across as plausible, and I haven't researched enough to know why that is. It needs to give an answer even if it's wrong. So when I'd say, write this article including quotes, and you look at it, and that's just clearly not a quote from Descartes. It's clearly not a quote from Nietzsche. And then you challenge it, don't you? You say like, what book's that from? And they say, as a AI, I can't, I made it up. So I found in the early days, the first few weeks, I was spending far more time fact checking and disproving AI than I was actually using it. The second thing is that I'm still finding as a writer personally that it doesn't get my voice. It doesn't quite get the way I think a lot of writers will speak, and it's really hard to it's kind of a bit like someone learning a language as a foreign language. I think, like if you're learning English as a foreign language, there are lots of little kind of hurdles along the way where you'll choose a word which sounds right, but actually a native speaker or someone writing it wouldn't use that word. And I think AI sometimes does that. So I'm trying to think of an example. Like, I mean, let's say the words kind of angry, frustrated, irritated, and furious. They're very kind of sister overlapping related concepts, but each of those words has a time and a place to use. And I found that with the AI, it gets that wrong slightly sometimes. It just it's hard. I don't know. Maybe I need to get better at my prompts, and maybe I need to be, in the style of Hemingway or in the style of, I don't know, Mark Twain, write something. But at the moment, I find that it doesn't quite get my voice. But what it is really good for AI is, well, two things I use it for mostly, and that's editing, the editing process. So kind of like doing spelling and grammar. And what I tend to use sometimes is, like I say, imagine you are a really pedantic Facebook commenter. How would you critique this article? And then actually that's quite good. It kind of rips your article to pieces, and you say, well, actually, that's a good point. Actually, that might be a bit of a weak argument. Let me change that or that word. So I do that quite a lot. And then the other thing I do is sometimes I'll get hit with a block in terms of like that. It happens quite a lot. Are you guys on Reddit? Do you know Reddit? There's a great Reddit called Tip of My Tongue, and it's like all those words that there is a word out there which exists for it, but you don't know what it is. And so for AI, what I'll do occasionally, I'll type in a sentence and I'll put an asterisk in the word which isn't quite right or I don't quite know, and I'll say, finish this sentence in 10 different ways. And 8 of them will be rubbish, but 2 of them will be like, oh yeah, that's actually really good. So in that way, I'm kind of using it as a kind of like as an inspiration board, really, just throwing stuff at a wall and then I'm picking it. So I like to think in this process I'm still relevant, that I still have the main creative input into it, but it's a really useful tool. And I think I've now got the balance right where it's helping me rather than wasting my time. I have tried doing the whole inputting my own text and saying, learn this guy's style and then repeat it. And thankfully, touch wood, it's not properly. But then, you know, Chat GPT 5's coming out, you know, who knows when, probably before Christmas. And then we'll have this conversation again, guys, and I'll ask for, you know, I'll be unemployed and ask for some money from you.
Do you feel like, you know, I think, you know, you said, you know, like using AI as a collaborative, you know, tool, like, yeah, how to say, discussion partner or helping to makes sense. But what will the future look like? What do you think the future will look like? You know, GPT-5, ChatGPT, you know, that those technology will improve in the future. And do you feel a bit scared about, you know, of your, you know, writing and your jobs, or what? Do you have any opinions around this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I am scared. And I think I think we all should be a little bit scared. I can think of very few jobs apart from maybe just like manual building jobs, which aren't, you know, vulnerable to AI in some way. But yeah, what I was so far, I don't think it's a threat. As I said, it doesn't quite get there. But I think the future is definitely going to be producing stuff which is indistinguishable from the writer. You know, I think it'll get there. The mistakes I was talking about earlier, it'll iron those out, and I think it will be able to do Jonny Thomson's voice. I think it'll be able to do any writer's voice. It'll do how maybe, you know, with the exception of absolute geniuses who are doing amazing stuff with metaphors, with kind of poetic language and stuff. I don't think they'll do that very well, but I think they will get there. And at that point, I just have to hope that it matters that what you're reading is from another human being. So actually, interestingly, like relating back to that driverless car article I wrote, there is a question here about kind of like responsibility and culpability and whose words you're reading. So particularly in philosophy, actually. So if I'm writing an article, mostly they're explainers, and I think they're probably more vulnerable to AI. But sometimes I'm writing a slightly argumentative piece. I'm arguing a position, a point of view. That I think when an AI is doing that, it's essentially it's a game for it, isn't it? It's trying to produce an argument because it can. And at what point then do you say, okay, right, I'm going to challenge you, AI? That comes a little bit ridiculous. And I'm going to say, right, Chat GPT, I'm going to take on your views about euthanasia. That doesn't make sense. Whereas I, Jonny Thomson, sitting here, am a human. Let's say I'm writing about euthanasia or abortion, whatever controversial issue you want. You can say, right, Jonny, you're wrong about this, or you're right about this, or I agree with Jonny. And that kind of human, well, that adversity of being against a human, but also that sympathy with another human being, I think that matters in philosophy, and I think in nonfiction writing. Novels, again, I think the issue is quite similar. I think you could repeat a lot of great novels in the future, but again, it matters possibly that the emotions and the stories that someone's telling comes from a human heart, maybe than an AI. But if I'm honest, I think I'm being naive. I'm being idealistic. I think if you look at AI art, and I think if you look at AI photos, I think most people won't care. Actually, they'll get something which is cheap and good, and that's already happening. I know copywriters, for example. I know a few copywriters who have either been laid off or had their salary reduced because AI can just do basic copywriting very easy. So what I mean that like basic advertising things, you know, and that I think is an issue. And at the moment, you can tell, if you can tell if a newsletter has been written by an AI, I think, or an article online has been written by an AI, or even some posts I've seen on Instagram, actually, you can tell they've been written by AI. But in the future, you won't be able to tell. And I think for most people, that won't matter. And I think that's the problem. Hopefully, human made. Maybe that'll become a thing. Maybe that'll be it. So, like, you know, like we have organic on things. Maybe it'll be like, this is a genuinely human made product. And there'll be a whole people out there who want to buy human made stuff, but it'll be a luxury product for a few elite, I imagine. Yeah.
I see. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. So, oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you for answering so many questions. And do you have any? You know, I think, you know, people listening to this, I don't know, like video, audio, are interested in. I think they are like aspiring writers, I think. So do you have any advice to them?
Yeah. I think it's Stephen King who said this. If not, then someone can correct me. But he said like you have to read something like 5 times as much as you write, and I think that's definitely true. I think reading is really good for 2 reasons. One is it gives you ideas, it gives you content into your in your understanding, and 2 is it gives you a voice. It gives you how to write. As I said earlier, I suspect that my writing style is essentially a mimic of someone I liked growing up. I can't picture it. I've got to kind of point to it. I'm sure I am mimicking someone's style. I don't know who that is. So I'll definitely recommend reading. But I have to say, in this day and age, particularly if you're over a certain age, I think it's to read that amount. To be honest, I don't know how Stephen King manages to read 5 times the amount he writes. It's difficult. So in which case I would say just doing it is the best thing. I mean, any art, any talent, any skill, any excellence requires habits and doing it over and over again. So I was lucky with my book deal, for example. I had the Instagram account for about a year beforehand, and I was doing 3 posts a week for a year. So we're talking like 150 samples there, and each time I think I got better and better and better, and eventually when I went to my now agent with this proposal, and I think my writing style was much more polished. So read and write as much as you can. And with that one is kind of, it's easier said than done, but just like kind of just do it. I think I know a few friends who are really, really intelligent, really talented writers, really they've read a lot, but they just get this crippling anxiety when it comes to actually writing, because they just obsess about it being perfect. And I know some people can. I know, for example, P.G. Wodehouse, the guy who wrote the Jeeves and Wooster books, he would spend apparently days on a sentence to make sure it works in the structure and stuff. And there are amazing writers who do obsess about their writing, but I suspect that most writers at some point just need the sheer arrogance, confidence to say, right, my words are brilliant, and just go for it and write it down, and then assume that someone's going to read it. I think depressingly true that 99 times out of 100 confidence wins, even if it's maybe not well grounded.
I see. So yeah, thanks. And if some people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to reach out to you? Is Instagram or?
Yeah, Instagram's the best way. I pretty much pick up most messages on Instagram. Yeah, and Facebook likewise. So I've got this, a mini philosophy is on Facebook, so I pick up those as well. And then if the conversation's good and they're normal people, then they can start emailing me. But yeah, Instagram and Facebook is the best bet. And I'd love to speak to people and hear from people. But yeah.
Thank you. And this is the last question. It's a little bit off topic, but we are building Glasp, and we empower people, knowledge sharing. So people share more knowledge, and by capturing and sharing something, like a quotes, let's say, that people can collect quotes and share quotes with other people. Then do anything I think there are some people like Glasp users are listening to this podcast or YouTube, and do you have anything to tell them? I mean, if not, that's okay. But do you have any idea?
I think that's so important. Like, I mean, so I think I can't remember. What I would say is like extracting quotes and thoughts that you've had is so important. As I've talked about today, one of the things it's really good for my idea board. It's really good. Like I can remember a conversation well, or I can remember an idea well. But the other thing is, what I think separates a really good writer from maybe a slightly mediocre writer is that they have in the back of their heads a lot of anecdotes and quotes and stories. So that's one thing actually I don't think that AI is there yet at all at doing. So if you read someone like Christopher Hitchens, or if you read someone like Clive James, these great essayists, their writing is laced with lots of different kind of like historical references, kind of cultural references, an anecdote about this famous person, or a story about this favorite historical event. And they're basically what you're talking about there. They're clippings that they found, and they're putting them into their writing. And that's what I think makes their writing brilliant. I think that's when you're also talking to a really intelligent person or a really interesting person, they can do that. They can talk about those anecdotes. They can bring in lots of different things. So yeah, I think it's a great idea, and I think what it's doing is it's making people interesting. It's making people creative, and I think people's writing will be so much better when they have that ability to pull things into one document or speech or conversation. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
we hope some people, capture some quotes from this video or podcast or here.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, exactly. I'll be very kind. I'll be very humbled if that's true. But yeah, thank you very much, guys. It's been great chatting, and yeah, I hope we'll do it again maybe sometime.
Yep,
Yes.
let's do that. Thank you
Yeah.
for joining. So yeah.
Thank you. See you
Thank
later
you.
on.
Yeah.
Bye.
See you.
Okay,
Bye.
see you. Bye.